Good morning, brothers and sisters. Monday, Marco Polo Day. This week is an important teaching in the book of Galatians. We'll see that embracing the message of the cross keeps us from false teaching. Read that with me in Galatians 5:7-10. You were running the race so well. Who has held you back from following the truth or obeying the truth? It certainly isn't God, for he's the one who called you to freedom. This false teaching is like a little yeast that spreads through the whole batch of dough. I am trusting the Lord to keep you from believing false teachings. God will judge that person, whoever he is, who has become confusing to you. So if we were to ask ourselves this question, what is the false teaching that Paul is referring to, and what are the effects of believing false teaching? Well, we could find our answers in Galatians. What is the false teaching that Paul's referring to? It clearly is that the old covenant is still in effect. It still applies today. We've seen that repeatedly throughout this book we've been studying. And the false teaching instructs us to tell someone that they are under law. That's false teaching. Because true teaching is that Jesus obeyed and fulfilled and ended the law for us. Christ is the end of the law for righteousness, Romans 10 verse 4 says. Ephesians 2:14 and 15, listen to this. Jesus united Jews and Gentiles into one people when, I love this part, in his own body on the cross, he broke down the wall of hostility that separated us. He did this by ending the system of law with its commandments and regulations. Do you see this? Do you really see this? That when Jesus died on the cross, the whole system of law and commandments ended. Meaning that the law has been nullified, abolished, or destroyed at the cross. That's what Jesus did at the cross. So what we're doing, if we were to teach people the need to obey the law, is that we're denying the work of Christ on the cross. Do you see that? And that is what makes it false teaching. And Paul, what are the effects of believing this false teaching? Let's ask him. Well, Paul tells us that it's 1, enslaving, and 2, confusing. Enslaving and confusing. Remember, Paul asked, who has held you back from obeying the truth? It certainly isn't God, for he's the one who called you to freedom. God, through the gospel message, calls us to freedom. But the Galatians were going back to the law, which equals back to slavery. So the effect of believing false teaching about the law is that it's enslaving. God calls us to freedom. Galatians were called back to the law, back to enslavement. But it's also confusing. Did you see that? Did you see that in verse 10? Paul says, I'm trusting the Lord to keep you from believing false teachings, and God will judge that person who's been confusing you. How is false teaching confusing? Can you think about that with me? Well, didn't Paul teach them that Jesus died to make them right with God? Well, the law teacher said you must obey the 10 commandments, you must be circumcised, you must keep the law to be right with God. Well, didn't Paul teach them that Jesus' death on the cross opened up the way for all people, all believers, to be in God's family? You see, well, what did the false teachers say? You had to be circumcised to be in God's family. You see then that every aspect of false teaching is designed to minimize the work of the cross. You see that? That's why false teaching is false teaching. As Paul asked, who has kept you from obeying the truth? The opposite of truth is falsehood. What can you and I today in the 21st century, what can you and I today learn from what we just are reading and studying? That the message for believers, for us to live and to proclaim, is about the perfect life of Jesus Christ, who fulfilled the law through his perfect living. And it's about a crucified lamb who bled to atone for our sins, whose death makes us righteous, whose blood frees us from the burden of the law and from bondage to sin. And that by believing this message, we, like Abraham, are counted righteous. I have a question for us to consider today. How does believing the message of the cross keep you personally from believing false teaching? Let's talk about that. I want to hear from you.